Good morning, everybody, and welcome to what is the final day of Athena. To kick us off, we've got Mark Fell from Cisco, who's going to talk you through some CV and interview tips. So, Mark, take it away.
Fantastic. Thanks, Alex. Just give me a moment. I'll start sharing my screen, and hopefully we will be on our way. Super. Alex, can you just confirm that you can see that before I plow on?
Yeah, all good.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for having me. I know it's been a long couple of weeks for the Athena fortnight of events. So very well done for all of you having gone through the hackathon at the weekend. I think the results are due later on today. So good luck with that. I've got a bit of time today to talk through some CV and virtual interview hints and tips. I'm going to give you some insights from Cisco, who I work with, and maybe just a little bit from my experience in the background. So I'll first of all start with why you should listen to me, or why I think you should listen to me. I've got many years of recruitment experience, particularly in emerging talent, so within graduates, interns, apprenticeships, even work experience as well. I've been with Cisco for a few years now. I am a sales business partner. What that means is I cover all of the sales recruitment for emerging talent within Cisco. So we have countries about up to 30 across EMEA that I look after. Gives you the idea of the scale of what we do. And I will spend a few minutes just to talk a little bit further on Cisco, in case you've not heard of us before. Hopefully you've had some exposure, definitely during the last couple of weeks. So this is me. I'm sat in my home in Buxton in the Peak District with quite full bandwidth, but hopefully you can still hear and see me. We've not quite got a full fibre rollout yet in the Peak District. And as I said, I've got the experience that hopefully will make you want to listen and understand, some of the pitfalls that you could avoid when you're putting your CV together, and definitely some insights into how best to prepare and submit your digital interviews, or even virtual assessment centres as well. I will cover that. So this is what it's going to look like today. I've got a few topics to go over, as I've mentioned. Before I do, I'm just going to jump in quickly to talk about Cisco, though. And if we have time, I'll go through right at the end some of the opportunities we have, particularly in the UK and Ireland, from a graduate and intern perspective. But the main focus is going to be those first 3 points: the CV workshop, digital interviews, and as I mentioned, some assessment centre topics as well. Let's jump in, though, a little bit about Cisco. If you've not heard of us before, then that's not going to be too much of a surprise, I would say, from our side. That's because we're not necessarily your everyday in-home brand. We are very much a business-to-business organisation, but just because you haven't heard of us doesn't mean that we're not huge. We are across the world. We have, as you see there, 274 offices, really in almost 100 countries across the world. We've got 76,000 employees. So we are everywhere. We are a US organisation originally. Over 30 years has been going now. Originally as a networking, hardware, particularly focusing on those elements for the first 20 years or so, but we have started to shift over more to the software, developing our technologies, and actually finding ourselves to be, in most of the technologies we produce, to be the top in the world. So really proud of our track record of winning those markets, looking at market transitions and how we can achieve what we have achieved so far. I would say if you are interested in Cisco, one of the big points and one thing that I'm really proud of, particularly from an emerging talent perspective, is the amount of innovation that we introduce to Cisco year on year and introduce to the world, in fact. Looking at those patents, that number is ever growing all of the time. We have labs globally across the world where you can introduce your ideas from whatever level you may join Cisco at. You can always bring your ideas to the front, test them out. We've got all of those facilities to do that. So a great organisation to be in. I'm not going to spend more time on talking about us because you're here for the content. I get that. So please, if you are interested, my contact details were at the front end there. You can get in touch with me afterwards. I'm happy to discuss some of the opportunities we might have. But We're here for CVs and we're here for digital interviews. I'm gonna ask a question. I don't. When you submit a CV for a job application, how long do you think that the recruiter on the other end of that application is going to spend on your CV? Just have a moment thinking about that. I'll take a drink. You have a moment. It's not much longer than that time I just spent having that drink. Okay? It's about 15 seconds. Now that probably sounds absolutely horrendous, considering that it might have taken you a day, 2 days, a week, when you consider some of the referencing you might have looked at, people checking over your CV, all of the effort that you've put in to construct that CV together. And all we do is just cast a glance at it. There's a reason for that. And let me be clear here. I'm not saying that every recruiter only spends a quick glance, 15 seconds looking at your CV. Not always the case, but the reality of the situation is that we might be receiving thousands upon thousands of applications for 1 or 2 roles. It can be very, very competitive. And with that in mind, it might be that the recruiter looking at your application is just spending a bit of time to really try and draw out some key criteria. And what that key criteria is what you can see on the screen here. So what we're looking for instantly is, what does the job description say in terms of the eligibility criteria? What are those main points that we're looking for? If your CV says those, great, we'll be considering you further. We might even spend 20 seconds on it, who knows at that point. But the point is that if we don't see it, we'll quickly dismiss it. Now, if we don't see it and you have it, then something's wrong, right? Something's wrong with your CV submission, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But this is basically the priority of how somebody would screen a CV. So we'd look at that main criteria. Then we'd look at, okay, so what else? What else adds to this person, makes them stand out maybe? Looking at what you've done, maybe what you've studied in the past, how relevant that could be to the role. And then finally, we'd add a little bit more to that person. Okay, so what else are you? Who else are you? What have you done? How are you going to add to Cisco or any organization that you're applying to? And does that match with what we're looking for? Now, how you can help yourself and fulfill some of that criteria is what I'm going to look at over the next couple of slides. So here is a suggestion. Now, I'm not telling you this is how your CV must look. Here is a suggestion of what it could include. Definitely don't knock me down on formatting here. I'm just looking at the content. I'm not suggesting your CV should be this dull, nor should it necessarily be in this formatting. However, it's got the key points that you want to include in a suggested layout. So you would start off with the key information, contact information, who you are, how we get in touch with you. Okay, this could expand. Very often now we have a LinkedIn connection on there. So if you could throw in a URL, particularly from a technical perspective, if you've got any examples of work that you've done, portfolios, GitHub, anything like that that you want to add on there, great, because it might be that at some point, probably not instantly from that 15 seconds or so, but at some point, if we're digging deeper into your CV, then we'll be looking at that information. So you can definitely include it at the top there. And then it's all about your experience, because this is how we're applying to the criteria that I mentioned before. There's always going to be a key set of skills, competencies, of maybe some experience that you've done in the past that we would be looking for to fit with the role, right? In order to do that, for us to be able to find that information out, put it at the top. We often talk about CV pages, how many pages it should be. I think, you know, you can look at maybe a 2-page maximum, but the most important thing is that the key top information is there at the front end, because that's what we want to see jumping out. You can follow that with your education, so what you've been doing in the past. Make sure that if you're including some more elements of your education, so maybe some of the modules that you studied, maybe what your thesis was, if you are mentioning those, then make it relevant to the application. Okay, don't just add in your full list of modules for the sake of it. That's just filler. It's not going to benefit you, and it's going include your languages, anything that you speak. This is always beneficial, particularly for large organisations, because we might be looking further into the future to see where you could be moving on to. And then the additional skills is also important, right? So if you've got something, again, particularly pertinent to that role that you're applying to, include that. And finally, interests and hobbies. This is a bit of an optional one. I would say include it. My recommendation would be to include it. Again, to that point of re-reviewing CVs, particularly for hiring managers at the end, towards the end of the process, they would always like to see how this person is going to fit in within the team. So if you've got some maybe similar interests or hobbies, just something that adds to that person, because by that point, maybe the hiring manager's still not met you. Anything that they can do just to add to that rounded information of you. Within that, though, there's some considerations to make, right? So when you're talking about your interests and hobbies, if you're talking about something, make it particularly interesting. Don't just put down that you like traveling or you like music, you like cooking. I mean, there are three nice hobbies to have, definitely. But what does it mean? Everyone likes traveling. I mean, right now, 21st century, everyone is traveling. Telling us that you've traveled to 25 different countries, that's just a boast, okay? But if you've traveled to 25 different countries, and in each of those you did some volunteering or you got to know the local cultures, and that's helped you as a person or has changed you as a person, that's great. That's adding some character to your CV, and ultimately we think that's making you potentially a match for Cisco. So make sure that it's relevant, whatever you're putting on there. Add a bit of colour into it, just to brighten up your CV in Word format, that is, and yeah, that would really help you further down the line. Talked a little bit there about how it can look. I'm going to mention a bit on the formatting and maybe some key information that you should include as well. So when it comes to formatting, as we saw there on the previous slide, make sure that the information that you're including is nice and clear. Make sure that you're highlighting any important information. So things like bullet points can really help with your structure, making sure that you're putting key information out there. I'll talk about keywords just after this in terms of the application and the job description itself. But I would always say when it comes to the information you're including, don't ramble on, okay? Going back to this whole point of we don't spend a lot of time on your CV, just ensure that the point is very clear, no excessive words. You don't need to be fully describing. This isn't an essay. This is more about seeing how you fit to that job application. One thing I'm also going to add here, and it's relevant for your CV, any job submissions you're putting through, is it's always a good idea to have a different CV for every job that you're applying to, which might sound absolutely horrendous in terms of the preparation you have to put in, but it's very important, particularly when you look at the criteria, and we'll go into that a little bit further next. One of my pet hates when I'm looking at CVs definitely is seeing things all jumbled up. It doesn't take a lot of time from your side just to spend that extra moment. Take a step back. This is where it's always good to have someone else to review your CV. Don't be precious about it. So get them to cast an eye on it and just check for your spelling, check for your formatting. Please don't throw it out with a variety of different colours, fonts, text sizes. There's nothing wrong with being a little bit dull because it's the information that's most important. When it comes to the information that you're leaving out there, chronological is always the best idea, just so we can get a good understanding of your background. If you are a recent graduate or soon to be recent graduate, that information could also be important. So when you're listing education, it's good to have a graduation date. To give a real life example, many internships, most internships in fact, would require you to still be a student or maybe going on to be doing a master's. With that criteria in mind, we need to clearly see that you are still a student. So not putting dates on there maybe makes us need more information, maybe means that your CV is quickly looked over. Okay, so just have all this information. Okay, I mentioned that it's really a good idea to try and have a different CV per role application that you're applying to. This is because each of the different roles you're applying to, though there will be some similarities, there will be key criteria, as I mentioned before, that every role is looking for. We want to be able to see that in a CV. And there's nothing wrong with tinkering with the formatting to ensure that this is put forward in the CV content. So, for example, if you have a read through that job description, highlight the keywords in there, make sure that they then feature, if of course they're applicable, don't lie, within your own resume. Include them, highlight them in some way, maybe put them in bold, make it easier for whoever is reviewing that to see that key information. So always a good idea to try and match the two up so that, again, your CV is noticed. If you think about hundreds or thousands of applications coming in, it's all about getting yours noticed. That doesn't mean bright yellow font. It means being very relevant to what the recruiters look for. Okay, we've talked about what you should do. I'm going to talk a little bit about what you shouldn't do. I think some of these are obvious when it comes to personal details, but definitely I've already mentioned a couple of these as well. I think, just have a little bit of a professional consideration in your CV, and also consider what it's going to be used for further down the line. So personal details, always good just to have the basics. So as I said, a name, an email address, a contact telephone number, and then maybe a LinkedIn contact, something like that. That's it. That's all you need. You don't need to add anything else. I would even say you don't need to add an address. Some jobs, I mean, now particularly, we're going more into a virtual world where we're working from home. Remote working is very common. We don't need to necessarily know your location. So I think that information, if need be, would be on an application profile anyway. Doesn't need to be on the CV. Don't worry about that. I've talked about not falsifying information. Now, this is really key, particularly if you start looking at, working at some financial institutions, some of those where security checks, background checks are very, very high. You'll find that different employers have different severities, different levels of background checks that they conduct. Myself, I used to work for a global bank, and their checks, of course, were very stringent. What that meant is that every bit of information on somebody's CV was sieved through, was picked apart, and double-checked against to ensure that it was true. Because any false information on there could potentially mean that this person has had some wrongdoings in the past, let's say. So please do consider, and this comes down even to the minutiae of things like dates that you've been employed at places. Don't falsify any of that. Typically, background checks will go back 5, maybe 7, maybe 10 years, again, depending on that severity. So just consider that when you're including your information. Try and make it as accurate as possible. Use things like payslips, P45s, things like that will help qualify what you're saying on there. I've already mentioned the empty words elements. It's always good just to put the core information in there. Same with email addresses. We've all got those ridiculous email addresses. I think mine was Yeah Baby. It shows my age a little bit because I think I created it around the time Austin Powers came out. If anyone was wondering how old I was, there you go. So that was my Yeah Baby at yahoo.co.uk. I certainly wouldn't be using that on my application these days. Something nice and straightforward. If you haven't got one yet, if you haven't got a nice, clear email address, it's not hard to get one. I would also add just with that, if you are still a student or if you're still searching for work and you're using your university email address, always a good idea to have a separate one, a personal email address, even if it's something just as straightforward as a Gmail account, just because at some point your access to that account will probably cease. So the university address, you will lose access to that. So I think it's good to ensure that you can pick up any onboarding emails further down the line, things like that. So just one consideration for that. A question we often have with CVs is looking at pictures. Are pictures necessary? I would say if the job application says it, then include it. Rarely they would. It depends on countries. In the UK, it's most typical. The tradition certainly is not to include a picture, whereas other countries, particularly within continental Europe, it is the tradition. I would say there's no need for one personally, but if you are wanting to include one, make it professional. Make sure it shows you in a professional environment, not just simply something you've lifted and shifted off your Facebook profile from a couple of years ago. And finally, with that, maintain that professionality. There's no need to include any jokes. If you are someone with a great sense of humor, we are too, definitely, and that employer would like to see that. But maybe there's a possibility of introducing some of those softer skills in the recruitment process in some sort of interview. So there's no space for it, I would suggest, on any CVs, or in fact on the next element that I'm going to talk about, which is a LinkedIn profile. So yes, you've submitted your CV. Great. Once we've reviewed that, if we've passed you through, we'll probably also take a look at your LinkedIn profile. Definitely managers tend to do this as well. So other stakeholders who are involved in any recruitment process, it's always a good idea to have something there. I would almost say if you have something, if you have a profile and it's complete, go with that option, or don't have a profile at all. It's better to be one extreme or the other. If you have a profile and it's kind of a bit of a half effort from yourself, it can maybe suggest that either you're not serious about looking for roles, there's maybe some assumptions that can be made by somebody, and we don't want to leave any space for assumptions within the recruitment process. So what I would suggest is go through just like the CV, apply the same information in there. You tend not to go into that much detail within LinkedIn. You can just have some core information. It's always a good opportunity, though, to start making those connections, link up. This is previously where you've worked. This is someone I worked with. Who knows, they might give you a recommendation, refer on some of the skills that you've recently been doing. There are lots of different tools within LinkedIn that can help you set that up. So it's a very nice format. I don't work for LinkedIn, but I tell you that as a recruiter, we use it very often. It is probably the first platform we would go to when looking for candidates, particularly in those hard to find roles. So it's always a good idea to have some sort of preferences on there and make sure that you are featured if at all possible. Again, if you're looking for work, make sure you're visible. Just make sure your profile's out there. When it comes to connections, yes, we do advise having good connections. I think it's helpful for yourself. I think probably the best thing is just to help inform you a little bit. I mean, my feed is full of information I like to see. That's from different emerging talents, people that I've maybe worked with in the past or connected with, different universities that we work with, other organizations. I basically use it as a bit of an education tool to see what else is happening out there. That's how I would suggest you build up that network for yourself as well. How is it benefiting you? It might be that you connect with loads of different recruiters because you're looking for a job. Great, that makes sense, but then make sure you've got the profile to back that up as well. All right, I'm going to move forwards. I also want to make sure we've got time for our digital interviews as well. But before I do move on and away from CVs and LinkedIn, I'm just going to mention that there's not just LinkedIn as your public persona online. And I'm sure you're all very aware of this, being fairly techy in yourselves, but we don't always think about how other people are looking at us. Best thing to do, you can even, if you're watching this back, pause the recording and go and Google yourself. Have a look and see. Make sure you're logged out of your account. Do it in a hidden browser or something like that, so that you can see what your, as I said, public image is like. You might be surprised at some of the photos that you've been tagged in the past. That one party from a few years ago that you've forgotten about, suddenly that picture rears its head up and is visible for a hiring manager to see. Do you want that hiring manager to see that? Do you want them to be aware of that? Maybe you do, maybe you don't mind. There's nothing wrong with showing a human side to us. But at the same time, do you want them to see it before you are recruited by them. Maybe that's something that they can discover further down the line. Point is that it's always good to be in control and be aware of how you are presented externally. So just have a look at that. Just check that, make sure that you're happy with everything that is published in your name or with your name associated with it. These are just some examples of where you might find yourself, because these are obviously the social media that's been prevalent over the last 10 years or so. But yeah, I would just suggest throwing yourself into Google, maybe some of the information that's on your CV, how someone might find you, and have a look. You might be surprised, and maybe you just take control of that. Okay, I'd like to move forward. Apologies, hopefully you can't hear my dog too much. I'm going to move forward and talk for the next 5-10 minutes or so about one-way digital interviews. Before I do, I'll explain what I mean by one-way digital interviews. For us in the recruitment world, this is where you are given a platform to record yourself on, to submit a video, usually in response to a set of questions, often a set of questions you haven't received before. You've never seen it in the past, so you haven't had the chance to prepare exactly for each of those questions. And it'll be just like this, like I am sat staring at a camera and responding, maybe with the possibility of 3 minutes to submit your video. Maybe you've got the chance to re-record. But that's the setup essentially. There's not another person on the other end usually with a one-way digital interview. It's just you listening to yourself, talking to yourself, and then submitting the video afterwards. So we're going to talk about some considerations, things that you should take into mind when doing this. Now, the reason we do that, we talk about this, yes, it's part of Cisco's application process for many of our roles. It's also very, very common for lots of different recruiters, lots of different organizations within the market now as well. So hopefully you'll find some useful hints and tips. We'll also then talk about things that you should consider when looking at assessment centers. That information I would add here is also applicable for things like just face-to-face interviews that are happening virtually over WebEx or other video platforms. So the first thing I would say is really know why you are applying for that role. So whenever you are given a digital interview, I would suggest that organization, because it's possibly the first time that they are meeting you. That is seeing your face and getting to know you a little bit more in terms of your personality, really getting that interaction from you. They will be asking you about why you are applying to that job. And that means that you've got to really sell why you're applying to the job. We are very aware that you may well be submitting 4, 5, maybe 10, 12 different applications for jobs. That's fine. We're not going to judge you against that, but we do still want to hear why you want to work for us. It's not just good enough to say, I want this job, or I want to get paid lots, or I want to travel globally. Great. We all want to do that, but what makes you different? What's going to make you stand out? So really have a good think about it, a bit of a reflection. I talked previously about Googling yourself. It's always a very good idea to Google the organization that you are looking at. Of course, the number one place to look is their website. That is where they fully control their brand, their messages, what the organization wants to distribute out externally. But it's also good to have a look around. If you put an organization into Google, you can see news articles, recent things that have been released. It'll give you the different social media websites that they are using to advertise themselves, and basically gives you that broader section of how the organization is. Why do you do all this? Well, one, you learn a little bit more about them. You get to say something more on them. But I think more importantly, and more importantly for us as well, you get to understand how you can see yourself working within that organization. How do you match their values? It is their public idea of themselves and their personal brand, their organization's brand. Is that something that you can match along with? Do your values match theirs? That's really important and something that we would love to see, and I'm sure your organization as well. within your video submissions. It's nice to hear how you can see yourself within that company. So make sure that that matches. And on the other side of that, there's nothing wrong with learning beforehand if that doesn't work. It's much better to be honest with yourself, because otherwise maybe you'll do a really great submission, have a fantastic application process and get the job. But 3 months down the line, you'll find yourself hating working there. You have to do it all over again, because actually what that company works for, what they do day to day, the people that work there, that's not you. So it's much better to find that out early on. And any good video or application process will also bring that information out to you. So as I said, have a good look online, search the company. Also, have a good idea it's a good idea to have a look at employees on LinkedIn, the sort of things that they're sharing. This is where some of those connections can really help you. Just be wary there that it's not always beneficial to connect with the direct hiring manager. If you do find out who that hiring manager is, they're often, they're not able, like a recruiter is, to sit there on LinkedIn day in, day out. That's all we do, and exchange messages with potential applicants. So they haven't got the time for that. So I wouldn't necessarily suggest going down that route. One opportunity you do have, though, is to connect with past employees or current employees. Maybe if there's someone who's currently doing that job or works within that team, if you found out that information, that's a great start for you to start digging in and finding out a little bit more from them. So this is all about your motivation, because the questions you're asked, as I said before, you don't necessarily know what they're going to be, but inevitably there will be something like, why do you want to work here? Or how do you see yourself fitting in this position? And this is where you can get a jump on that and start putting in your preparation beforehand and have something ready to say, rather than being shocked on the spot. I'm now going to talk about what kind of questions you might be asked. And this is going to be applicable for both a digital interview, maybe a telephone interview, maybe even face-to-face as well. It's very common to see one particular structure come through for digital interviews, telephone interviews as well, as I said. And that's called competency-based questions. So competency-based questions, if you don't know, if you've not heard about them in the past, these are the type of questions where they're asking you for a time that you did something. They're asking you about your past experience. So they're typically looking for a scenario that's happened where you've had an active role, what happened, and what was the outcome. It's a very good way of finding out how somebody's past can match with potential in the new role. It's very commonly used, and I would say there's kind of a set number of criteria, competencies that can be asked for within interviews. Going back to the point of not having seen the questions before, this is still something that you can prepare for, right? So you can have a look and see. Just to have a look online, check for the different types of questions you're asked for on communication skills, delivering results, things like planning and organizing, teamwork, building relationships. They're the standard ones that you'll get asked about. So you can have some of these ideas in mind to prepare and then present them. The way that you should present these, there's a very simple technique. We're going back even to the real basics of interviewing here, but it still rings true. Trust me, it even rings true in professional hiring as well, which is called the STAR technique. If you have something like this in mind when you're answering a question, it just gives you a bit of structure. It gives your narrative, your story, that bit more clarity. So if you start thinking about, okay, what was that situation? What was the whole of the background there? And then what did I have to do within that? And then what did I do? And then what was the result for me? And how did I impact that? And throughout all of that narrative, you are the key player. You are the active role there. Remember to make sure that you are central to each of that. So that's probably the most common type of question that you'll get asked. However, we have, of course, started to see different types of questions come through. So those that don't look necessarily at past behaviours, how you have acted in certain circumstances. There's another school of thought here, which is called strength-based questions. Strength-based questions are slightly different. They're not asking you about what you have done. They're looking a little bit more at potential. So what would you do in certain circumstances? Or even better, a lot of questions are asking you, what are you good at? What do you enjoy doing? And that is a great opportunity to sell yourself genuinely. So going back to the CV point, obviously we're talking honestly here. We don't want to fabricate anything. It's all about finding out about you. But the strength-based questions are, as they sound, they're all about selling yourself, talking about the things that you are good at. So good idea to practice those as well. There are many different tools online in order for you, that give you the opportunity to practice these. And it's always good if you've got your questions lined up, just to talk through them. I'll go through in the next few slides as well, that preparation point, but good if you can even test these out on other people, see how they sound. Are they authentic enough? Do they show out that genuine you? Always a good idea for that. Okay, I'm going to move forward. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some do's and don'ts. Before I do, I'm going to give you some examples of the don'ts. You probably know all of these. These are some classic cases from the past 12 months or so, particularly as we've moved into that more remote working environment of situations where people haven't really taken in all of the considerations that I'm going to talk through now, and allow some maybe external factors to have an influence on what's happening in their video feed. Now, sometimes we can't help some of these. However, we can try and contain them. And of course, as I said, in the current environment where we're all working from home, my dog's barking in the background right now. There are things that are out of our control, but we can try and mitigate them, as I said. So what I'm going to do is try and talk through so you can avoid being the priest with filters on his face, or the person who didn't bother to get completely fully dressed, which, by the way, is absolutely fine. You don't know if I'm wearing trousers or not right now, but at least you can see this half, and I'm not showing off the bottom half like the guy whose pants you can see. All right, so with that, first topic, dress appropriately. That means dress appropriately for that environment, okay? So if you know the organization has a very, very relaxed culture approach to how you can dress, that's okay. Remember, though, still, you want to present your best self. So I'm not saying you have to become suited and booted to any interview, but at the same time, it's always good just to show off yourself in the best light. So that might mean that you put on a nice shirt that you save for that special occasion. Or it might mean that you have something that you want to show off previously from your past, something nicely branded that's associated with the organization, something like that. But make sure that it is suitable. Our clothes do say a huge amount about us, and unfortunately, there are still people with bias. So you want to try and remove any possibilities of sending out the wrong messages, even if it's not something that should be the present. But please, I think, just bear that in mind. Our dress does definitely affect the perception that people think about us. And also, on the other side of that, there are various studies that show that how we dress for ourselves change how we feel about ourselves. When we put that suit on for an interview, it switches us on a little bit. It zones us in. It gives us potentially that confidence boost to think, okay, yes, I can do this. I can get through that. So also take that into consideration. If you're sat there in T-shirt and shorts, are you mentally ready for that interview? Because we always want to be putting our best self forward here. So just take that into consideration. Another thing to have in mind is your technology. Now, this covers a huge array of different things, from does your camera work? Does the platform that you're recording yourself on allow your camera to engage in it? Is your microphone clear? Have you got the sufficient bandwidth? As I mentioned before, I'm in the peaks. It's not so great for me, hence why I'm dialing in via my phone. All of these things you have to take into consideration, because the main point of any interview is you, and you don't want any distractions around. We want to see you. We want to get to know you better. You might only have 15 minutes in this interview to really, truly put yourself across. So anything you can do to eradicate those distractions, which we'll talk about in a little moment, or things that might make the focus go away from yourself, or your focus go away from that eye-to-eye contact, it is really important to try and remove, okay? So just check each of those things. I mentioned previously about rehearsing. If you've got any prepared information that you want to go through, it's always a good idea just to check it through. Also, it's always good to check the platform itself, whether that allows you to actually re-record any of your videos. So if you've got that opportunity to even prepare beforehand, so maybe a practice video, then do take the opportunity. Some of you might not be very comfortable with recording yourself. That's absolutely fine. We get that. It's not a completely natural scenario, but anything you can do to try and ease yourself in is beneficial. Word of caution on that one. Some of the practice videos with some video platforms, certainly some that I've worked on in the past, still submit that video to the recruiter, not for an assessment purpose, but sometimes just the platform itself naturally goes through. So have a consideration as to what is being recorded in that practice video. Definitely, if you're just using it for your practice, then it might be fine. But what happens at the end of that practice? If you mess up, for example, do you start swearing? Some of us do, naturally. I do quite often. But do you want to record that message and that message to go through? Again, it's just about controlling your persona a little bit, that personal brand. Honestly, I've seen in the past, I've seen mums walk in offering a cup of tea during interviews. This is going to link to the next point as well. I have seen people in their pants, people topless, people still getting dressed, ready for their interview, just because they're practicing while they're going through in that initial recording. So again, just take control of that. Just have a consideration. Just have a thought. Setting is very important. As I said before about controlling your environment. If you do live with other people, make sure they're aware that you are being interviewed at this hour. Put a sign on your door, or just let them know. Turn your phone off. Make sure it's far away from you. There are no interactions, no pop-ups coming up. It's all very important to control that environment. Again, so the focus is on you, and so that your focus is on performing that particular interview. Same with this setting, and we know that everyone's working from home, or most people are working from home right now. We don't all have a home office though, so it might mean that you have to record in your dining room or in your bedroom. But that doesn't mean that you have to show us the dirty pants that are on the floor, or your unmade bed, or other things that are distracting the assessor from you. Again, so just control all of those environments that are around you. Same with lighting, just things around windows being open. Do you live by a main road? All of these little points we see often coming through, and it distracts you or it distracts the person watching. So I would suggest take them into consideration. Shut the window, no sirens, no construction outside, things like that. No bright lights shining through. And then finally, communication is key. So throughout the whole of this, even though there's no one there, I've been looking down my camera because I want that eye contact. I want you to see that I'm looking at you and engaging with you. You need to do exactly the same as that. I mentioned before about hiding your phone away. A big tip, if you're doing any pre-recorded or even live video feeds, any live interviews via WebEx or other platforms, then hide yourself. Okay? There's always the opportunity to minimize your video feed. If there's not, grab a Post-it or something and just shove that in front of it, because I spend all day, every day on WebEx. Honestly, I do. My team is spread all across Europe, and all I do is sit here on calls. But I don't want to be looking at myself. I want to be engaged with that other person, so I hide myself. And it's very natural, if I don't, to start looking at my video. I'm not vain. I promise you, I'm not a vain person. You can tell by my scraggly beard. But it's very natural for us to do that. And again, you just want to make sure that your focus is on the other person and making that eye contact. So minimize yourself, and ultimately be yourself. Be how you would be in person. Okay, and I know that's very hard when you're pre-recording something, but be as natural as possible. Smile, put your persona, your personality across, please, because we want to meet you. And as I said before, this might be the only opportunity. We don't get to see each other face to face these days as often, particularly in assessment processes. So anything you can do to really put yourself across naturally, then please take that opportunity. Okay, I've got a bit of time. I'm going to quickly talk about assessment centres. However, an assessment centre is something that is quite applicable for, I would suggest, an emerging talent lineup of application processes. It's often something that you would see for a graduate program, particularly where they're bulk hiring. So if that's something that you are looking at, then definitely, please engage in this. Assessment centres, though, are often these days held virtually. So things I'm going to be talking about are hints and tips for live interviews as well. So just consider that. An assessment centre itself, though, is done, say, by companies like Cisco who have graduate programs. It's usually the final step of the process. It's usually something that's used to select a number of candidates all together. So often it'll be bulk hiring. Maybe we'll see 10 or 12 candidates in one day, stacking them up, presenting a number of different assessors from a variety of different business areas who get to see those candidates all in one go. So very, very useful from a hiring perspective. Typically, you would have a variety of different topics and exercises covered within an assessment centre. So things like a role play potentially, where you're given a scenario and asked to act that out, possibly asked to prepare a topic of your choosing or maybe of the company's, and you're asked to present that. Things like group exercises. So even though you're dialing in virtually via that video platform, you might still have a group exercise where you're given a situation and asked to work that one out together, viewed again by the assessors on the other side. Could be things like a discussion, maybe some sort of assessment, though often assessments are done prior to the centre itself. And of course, there might be an interview. Usually there would be some sort of interview as part of the assessment centre. All of this, of course, also applies face-to-face. We will at some point in the next, hopefully in the next 6 months, definitely in the next 12 months, I feel, be back to face-to-face interviews. And the same format would apply. You would get all together, you'd potentially be in one room with your fellow candidates at the same time, and go through different types of exercises like that. As I said, so you get multiple candidates, you also get multiple assessors. So it's a great way for you to engage with different people from the business. So make sure you've got some questions. There will be different skills looked at. Some of them might be things that you have already presented on, things like team building. Certainly your communication would be assessed. It's a very good way, though, as I said, for us to see different candidates, multiple candidates at the same time, and also a way of leveling that playing field a little bit in terms of here's our criteria, here's the same exercise, we're going to pit you against you and see who does best in each of those. And that all of the competencies, all of the skills that we're looking at, they will have been matched to the role itself. So it's all very, very helpful for us. And also a swift process, I would suggest, very helpful as well. In terms of the assessment centre, preparation, suggestions, everything that we've said regarding digital interviews and telephone interviews is also applicable, of course, in terms of managing that environment. It's all about that first impression. You only get one chance to make that first impression, remember. So anything you can do to influence that in terms of your attire, how you look, we mentioned before, just take it in, consider the personal brand. I believe there's another session later today on personal brand. So if you don't know what I'm referring to when I say that, just have a look at it, because it's very important to take control of that and know how you are presenting yourself. So a little plug for a later session there. As I said before, always good to know who you're applying to, what you're applying for. So just have a look through that. Have another review of the job description. It might have been 6, 8 weeks maybe since you applied. Do you remember what you're applying to? What actually is this job? Just collate all of that information in your mind before you go in. There's nothing wrong with a little extra cramming in just to be sure that you know why you're there. We've already talked about body language and eye contact. It's really important to make sure that you're putting yourself across in that best possible way. It's good to remove distractions. It's good not to be looking down at your notes if you are doing this virtually. It's okay to have notes, and it's okay to refer to them. Same goes for a digital interview. Maybe you could put post-its around your camera, things that you can refer to, just like you would on a PowerPoint slide maybe. But definitely not a good idea to have them to the side and looking off, because we don't know if you're truly engaged in that exercise And what I would say here is, I don't think it's actually written on there. Oh no, it is ask questions. This is a great opportunity for you, those interactive sessions, to learn more about who the people that you potentially could be working with are, what the culture's like, what it's really like working there. Just probe them a little bit. It's all well and good asking someone, okay, why do you like working at Cisco, or how long have you been working there? But do you learn anything from that? So really have a thought about your questions. And there's nothing wrong with having a list of prepared questions, because honestly, at the end of a face-to-face interview with someone, you've probably forgotten all the things that you wanted to ask at the end of that, because you just want to sit, breathe, or run away. So have a list of them prepared beforehand. It's always a good idea, and then you can just refer to them later on. And finally, and I will make this my last slide, I think you've listened long enough, thank you very much for that. I'll talk about things that you shouldn't do. And it's a very bad idea, I would suggest, because it puts you in a bad light, to start slating your previous employers, employees, colleagues, anything like that, professors. It can put you in a bad light as well, because you start questioning what your attitude was like in that situation. So don't make those comparisons. Just talk about the nice things that happened. If there were challenges, then talk about the challenge and talk about how you benefited from that, how you worked your way out of that. There's nothing wrong with that, but don't just start slating everyone. Similarly, don't pitch yourself against other people. It's all about you. It may well be you don't know how many people they're hiring for. So if you look at an assessment center, for example, or even an interview picture, you've seen a variety of different candidates there. You might not know that actually they're hiring 4 people there. So it's not always dog eat dog. It could be that everybody gets hired. So just concentrate on yourself. Just think about how you can be the best there, and put your best face forward there. So don't think about other people and trying to make that comparison. I've also already said about the casuality of how you approach this. I think it's always important. If you're passionate about it, then that will come across. Just put everything that you can across in it. Big one when we talk about motivation is salary considerations. Now, of course, everyone wants to get paid. Everyone works to live. That's how our society is set up. Of course, definitely, we want to get the most. We want to be paid the most to do that. Yes, it's a motivator, but it should not be your key motivator, and it should not be the first thing you start asking questions about at the end of that interview, because that suggests that your motivation is not correct. So just consider that. If you're unsure what the role is paying, then you can maybe start asking questions about that, but consider to ask them sensibly how you. Okay, and with that, I think I will stop talking. Thank you very much for listening. Hopefully you've taken some tips away from today. If you've got any questions, please feel free to get in touch with me. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to talk through any opportunities we have as well. We recruit not just within the emerging talent team. Of course, we have a vast variety of different technical roles and non-tech roles within Cisco. So please feel free to get in touch or find us at Cisco Jobs website. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you everyone for listening. Yeah, thank you for talking for so long. That was very insightful indeed. Hopefully everyone that's listening found it helpful. If you've got any questions, like Mark said, you can go back, get in touch, LinkedIn, email. We obviously have our Discord server that'll stay open, so keep asking, and we'll get kind of any answers over to you. But yeah, just a big thank you for your time, Mark, and thank you everyone for listening.
Pleasure. Thanks, Alex. Take care.